Greetings, everyone. We are hosting live from our Chicago office and excited to share the important trends facing philanthropy. I'm here with my colleagues, Peter Fissinger, CEO and President, Campbell & Company, and Aggie Sweeney, Senior Counsel, Campbell & Company. We are joined by our esteemed panel, Sue Cunningham, who joins us, and evidently I'm going from right to left, so forgive me here, but Sue Cunningham, who joins us from Las Vegas. She is the President and CEO for the Council for Advancement on Supportive Education. Molly Marsh Heine, who is in Colorado, and she is the Vice President of Development at Earthjustice, and the Senior Vice President of Advancement for the Cleveland Foundation, Kay Ridolfi, who joins us from Cleveland. On behalf of everyone attending today's webinar, thank you for sharing your insights and experience with us. Before we begin today's presentation, I'd like to quickly review some logistics for those of you who may be new to our webinars. To ensure that you have the best webinar experience possible, close any programs other than GoTo that are running on your computer. Call in using a telephone instead of using your computer speakers. And if you experience any visual issues, you can send a chat to Campbell & Company or contact GoTo at 1-800-263-6317. Today's webinar will last 75 minutes and you will earn 1 continuing education credit, and that is good for participation with CFR International. About an hour after the webinar, you will receive an email from GoToWebinars that includes a web address to download your certificate, as well as information on how to sign up for our next webinar. Because this is a product of the Giving Institute, we are not allowed to post or send out today's presentation. We do welcome questions during the webinar, and if you are willing to be unmuted, we will have you ask your question live. Please send your questions in advance by using the question pane to your right. And make sure to follow us on social media using hashtag GivingUSA2018. So just a quick welcome to Kay, Molly, and Sue. Thank you so much for joining us. And now I'd like to take a quick moment to introduce Peter Fissinger and Aggie Sweeney. Throughout his 30-plus years in institutional advancement, Peter Fissinger has designed and implemented major capital fundraising, annual giving programs, planned giving programs, and marketing and publication efforts. He is committed to creating effective and successful campaigns and development programs for Campbell & Company clients. Peter has served in advancement roles in institutions of higher education, independent schools, and medical organizations. He is Vice Chair of the Giving Institute, a member of the Board of Governors of the YMCA of Metropolitan Chicago, a member of the Council for Advancement and Supportive Education, and a past chair of the Giving USA Advisory Council on Methodology, and a past president of the Chicago chapter of the Association on Fundraising Professionals. So if you have any tough questions about the data, you guys are in good company because we have Peter here, as well as Aggie too. And Aggie is a recognized expert in her field and a frequent speaker for nonprofit groups and professional associations alike, including AFP and BoardSource. Her expertise as a change agent for organizations, regardless of size and sector, has earned her a reputation as an insightful listener and strategist. Aggie was promoted as the CEO of Collins Group in 2004 and led the firm as it joined forces with Campbell & Company in 2013 and transitioned to her current role in 2017. As senior counsel, Aggie focuses on working with clients and mentoring within the firm. She is chair of the Giving USA Foundation Board and has served on task forces for the Seattle Foundation and Washington Women's Foundation. She is a member of the AFP Advancement Northwest, Washington Planned Giving Council, and Washington Women's Foundation. So without further ado, I am going to turn it over to Peter. Peter?
Thank you very much, Sarah. Good afternoon and welcome, everybody. We're really looking forward to sharing this Giving USA data that just came out today and then having a robust conversation with our panelists who are content experts in their field. And I feel especially privileged this year to be joined by my colleague, Aggie Sweeney, who, as Sarah mentioned, is the sitting chair of the Giving USA Foundation and really has a deep understanding of the data and how it's produced as the foundation underwrites the research itself. We're going to begin today by showing about a 3 to 4 minute video that gives an overview of the results. So sit and watch this video with me, please.
Hold 1 second.
Strong market returns, political uncertainty, devastating disasters. 2017 had its share of ups and downs. But what did that mean for philanthropy? Each year, the Indiana University Lilly Family School of Philanthropy conducts the research for Giving USA, which the Giving USA Foundation publishes. Giving USA reports on the sources and uses of charitable giving in the United States. Campbell & Company is proud to support these efforts as a Giving Institute member. According to the data, total charitable giving surpassed the $400 billion mark for the first time ever, reaching $410.02 billion in 2017. That's over $410 billion being invested in our communities and bolstering our economy. What does it mean for the nonprofit sector now? Let's break it down. From 2016 to 2017, total giving increased 5.2% in current dollars. Though there have been some dips along the way, giving has grown for the better part of 4 decades. People continue to power philanthropy. Individuals made up 70% of total giving in 2017. And when you include bequests and family foundations, that number rises to 86.7%. These trends continued in 2017. What changed and why? Let's take a look. 2017 was a banner year for philanthropy. Giving rose across all 4 donor types, with particularly strong growth in corporate giving. Charitable contributions also increased to nearly all nonprofit sectors. Giving to foundations posted the highest growth rate, propelled by a robust stock market and several mega gifts. The arts and culture, public society benefit, health, and environment animal sectors followed. Arts and culture and health often pulling gifts from high net worth donors, and public society benefit includes some gifts made to donor-advised funds. At the other end of the spectrum, international affairs recorded a negative growth rate in 2017. Donor response to domestic disasters likely contributed to this dip. Did the big headlines of 2017 move the needle? Let's investigate. The economy has always played a critical role in charitable giving. In 2017, a strong economy and financial markets boosted giving by individuals. Disasters in 2017 helped spur the high growth rate in corporate giving, which included $405 million in disaster relief. What about tax reform? Following the Tax Reform Act of 1986, individual giving increased dramatically in 1986, then declined the next year. It's too soon to tell if the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017 has impacted giving or will in the future. For now, the outlook is bright. Despite 2017's ups and downs, giving continued to gain strength, proving the staying power of philanthropy. So where do we go from here? In 2018 and beyond, the nonprofit sector will continue to make the case for broad-based participation in philanthropy. And Campbell & Company will be there every step of the way. As nonprofit consultants, Campbell & Company tracks and interprets trends that impact organizations across America. Check out our website at campbellcompany.com for more analysis of the Giving USA data. To buy Giving USA materials, visit givingusa.org and use the code CAMPBELL for 30% off.
Shared a lot of information there, and what I'd like to do is to take about 15 minutes to dig a little bit deeper in some of the trends that we saw both in the research and in the video. So here are the topics that I want to cover, and then make sure that we have plenty of time for a robust conversation with our panelists. So the giving trends over time, you saw how the money came in and where it went, and this is what it looks like in a pie-shaped form. One of the things that's interesting to me about this data is just how consistent Americans have been in their giving patterns. So if you look at the longer term, this slide covers 5-year periods dating all the way back to 1978. If you look and understand that there's been a significant amount of activity of individuals moving money into family foundations and donor-advised funds, what you would see is that these statistics, these destinations, or these from where giving comes, has remained remarkably consistent since the data began in 1978. So there's really been somewhere between 85 to 90% of all giving generated by individuals. Earlier in the life of the data, we saw more of that in the individual category. More recently, we've seen money moving into the foundation category that accounts both for family foundations and community foundations that have donor-advised funds, as well as some migration into public society benefit that has the for-profit donor-advised funds. Likewise, if you look at where that money is going, again, I think it paints a picture of consistency. Giving to religion has always been the #1 destination for philanthropy. And if you look at this slide, which I want to recognize as a busy looking slide, it has those 5-year periods, and you can see the way data breaks down. Essentially what you see in this slide is that while giving to religion has remained the top destination, it is growing more slowly than some other segments, such as environment and animals, arts and culture, international giving. And so if you account for that general movement, what we see is more interest in other sectors. But other than that, I think the data has been remarkably consistent, both who drives giving and where it goes. So let's talk a little more about the relationship between the economy and giving, because if you look at the history of this data, you can see that the economy does impact giving significantly. And all of the most important indicators were up last year. The video mentioned S&P 500 up 19.5%. And if you look at these other indicators, they're all indicators of how people behave when they feel secure financially. We think that perhaps the best indicator is the underlined indicator there of disposable personal income, because when people have extra income they feel they can spend, they think about things other than basic needs. What would I like to accomplish? And this is an indicator of them choosing to support their favorite nonprofit organizations. And it creates an opportunity for us, if we're working at nonprofit organizations, to build a relationship with a new donor who's made a decision to support something they care about. So some other slides about the relationship between the economy and giving. What sectors, that's supposed to say sectors, by the way, were impacted most by the economy? Giving to foundations up 15.5%, that was mentioned in the video. This is high net worth individuals who are giving to their own personal family foundations or their donor-advised funds if they reside at community foundations. And then these next 3 sectors, arts and culture, health, and education, are all sectors that do well when the economy's strong. What we see very often among donors is that if the economy's weak, they may focus more on basic human needs in their giving. But when the economy's strong and they have more personal disposable income, they choose to invest in things that they think strengthen their community in additive ways. And arts and culture, health, and education all reflect that kind of giving. And again, giving by individuals went up 5.2%, identical to the overall growth in philanthropy. That's not a coincidence, because individuals really do drive the total to a significant degree. This is a slide showing the relationship between the S&P 500 and total giving over time. And all I want to share with you about this slide is that they do follow each other, but giving makes changes more slowly than the S&P 500. So the S&P 500 can jump up and drop down more quickly. What we see are individuals who behave a little bit more conservatively. The good news here to us is that individuals who have been supporting your organization, although if the market goes down, they may feel it. If you're one of their favorite charities, anecdotal data suggests that they'll try to maintain that giving. So the relationship that we have with donors is very important, even though these economic trends are quite powerful in predicting philanthropy. And now just the relationship between the gross domestic product and giving, it's remained somewhere between 1.7% and 2.1% for the full life of this data. A lot of us fundraisers would love to see giving rise to 2.5% or 3% of the gross domestic product. I just want to share with you that if that happened, it would take $74 billion for giving to rise to 2.5% of the gross domestic product and $172 billion for it to rise to 3%. So those are ambitious goals, great for us to have, but I thought you might be interested in hearing what it would take to move the needle to that degree. Let's talk for a minute about the rise in donor-advised or DAF giving. We estimate that it accounted for 20% of public society benefit giving last year, which would have been $6 billion. There are over 69,500 DAF accounts in community foundations across the country, and we have a panelist who can tell us more about that in just a few minutes. What we're finding is that to the extent that we can uncover it by data, that there's a lot of giving going on from these donor-advised fund accounts, probably well in excess of the 5% minimum that would be required in a family foundation. And so we do see a lot of money going in and going out. There has been some scrutiny around this topic, and some people feel the reporting could be stronger or there could be a minimum amount that's given out by DAF accounts. Whether or not that happens, frankly, in our view, is beside the point. Donor-advised funds are here to stay, and if you are working at a nonprofit organization and raising funds, please know that you have donors who have donor-advised fund accounts, and we need to build strong personal relationships with them. Just a little more data on this. This data only goes through 2014, so it's not current, but what it clearly shows is the ramp up in donor-advised fund giving. And then one more slide. I just want to show you that these donors are giving to a wide range of organizations. It looks like education gets a little bit more as a percentage of the total. I think it was 14% of all giving, 29% of donor-advised fund giving. But these donors are giving to a broad cross-section of nonprofit organizations across the country. Let's talk a second about disaster giving. These are some of the disasters that took place that we know sparked additional giving in the last year. It can be difficult to document exactly how much additional giving, but we see the jump in corporate giving to be fairly significant last year, and we think there's a relationship here between disaster giving and corporate giving. You know, really why I wanted to share this is it's another example that while giving can be very consistent, it also creates opportunity for nonprofit organizations. You may have a new donor come to you because that donor feels your organization can help provide to the needs of a community that's experienced a disaster, and it's an opportunity to build a lasting philanthropic relationship. Moving on to the political climate, some called the Trump bump. Let me just say that while it's difficult to say exactly how much giving additionally was created across all of the data because of the political climate, there's no question that additional giving was made as a result of how people felt about the political climate in the country. So take Earthjustice, that reported they had 160% increase in giving in 90 days after the election. Molly can correct me if I'm wrong about that, but it's in the data. The Environmental Defense Fund posted a 500% increase. Planned Parenthood, 1,000% in 100 days. Advocacy organizations such as the ACLU also experiencing this kind of increased giving as a result of the current political climate. There's reference to some research in the backup data for Giving USA called an Edge Research Survey, which reported that in its survey, 1 in 5 respondents reported making a gift in response to political or social events. This is an emotional response to how people feel about what's happening around them. Let me just show that the giving's kind of bipartisan, that 53% Democrats, 32% independents, 16% Republicans. So this is human behavior, and again, creates an opportunity for us to build lasting relationships with donors when they choose to make a gift to our organization. Tax reform, another big development in the past year. It was signed into law on December 22nd of 2017. Some of the key things that happened, and this is across the board, there are specific sectors that were affected more differently than others, but the top marginal tax rate lowered from 39.6% to 37%. This means the people in this tax rate, first of all, they're going to have more personal disposable income. However, the cost of making a gift has gone up slightly, so we'll have to wait and see what happens with that change to the tax law. The estate tax protection doubled to $11.2 million. It's $22 million if you're in part of a married couple. That's a significant increase. The exemption rates, the personal exemption rates doubled, which we believe will cause more people to choose not to itemize on their taxes and therefore not be able to benefit from a charitable deduction. State and local tax deductions were capped at $10,000. We did see some movement with organizations where they made significant gifts in 2017 that they had been planning to make later. What is going to really happen across the board as a result of tax reform is open to debate, and we'll be interested to see how it proceeds. We at Campbell & Company are particularly concerned about non-itemizers not having a charitable deduction available for their giving. Mega gifts in this research is defined by gifts that are big enough to move the needle. So it's recalculated every year. This year was estimated $300 million gift can move the needle in giving. We had $4.1 billion in mega gifts made by living individuals and an $800 million bequest. There was only one mega bequest last year, which is kind of interesting. So here are some of the people that made those big gifts. Mark Zuckerberg and Priscilla Chan, $1.8 billion. Michael and Susan Dell, $1 billion. Florence and Herbert Irving, $600 million. And Michael Bloomberg should be on the list as well, and I can't remember the amount. But what we did see was that this really almost $5 billion of giving went almost exclusively to foundations. These are wealthy individuals transferring money into their family foundation. One of the gifts went to an academic medical center, and it'll show up in the giving to education category because it is a teaching facility. If you look at these big gifts, foundations receive 61% of the gifts of $1 million or more, and college and universities receive 12.5%. So this supports some of the data that we saw on earlier slides, the destination for gifts when the economy is strong. We thought it might interest you that there are 132 Americans who have signed the Giving Pledge, and their household net worth is estimated to be about $680 billion. So there's more giving to come from those folks. So what does this all mean to us? You know, there's one way of looking at this data to say that we really don't have any control over it. These are factors that cause people to give or to give more. But on the flip side, we consistently see some nonprofit organizations doing better than others. And what we see is they take advantage of these opportunities to build lasting relationships with their donors. So what are the things that they're doing? Focusing on acquisition, retention, and upgrading especially. You know, most of our clients, when we do annual giving surveys, we find that all they would have to do is strengthen their retention and upgrading of current donors in order to build their annual fund to the size that they would like it to be. The best way to do this, among other things, is to make sure that you have built an effective multi-channel program for communicating to donors, sharing the mission of the organization, the impact of their giving, and encouraging them that they're making a difference by supporting your organization. This means that organizations really have to be willing to invest in and then effectively use technology. We see a lot of organizations invest in technology, but do they really take the time to understand how best to use it to provide mission advantage to their organizations? And then lastly, these last bullets really have something to do with each other. You have to build lasting relationships with donors. We were involved in a campaign for $250 million about a decade ago, and more than half of the total came from donors of $1 million or more. We were very interested by the post-campaign analysis that showed that every one of those donors, the first gift they ever made to the organization was less than $1,000. This means the organization was effective in building lasting relationships with their donors. In order to do that, you have to know them well. Take time to learn about them, their interests, what they're trying to accomplish. Steward them effectively so that they are able to see the impact of their gift and understand that you care about the giving that they're doing with you. Show them impact. And in the end, really just cherish your donors. And these are some best practices that we focus on all the time with the organizations that we have the privilege to be working with. So I want to thank you for your time and attention, and now I want to turn it over to my colleague, Aggie Sweeney, who's going to engage in a robust dialogue with our panelists. Aggie?
Great. Thank you so much, Peter, and thanks for sharing such valuable information so succinctly. We appreciate it. I'd like to take a few minutes to introduce our panelists to you with a little bit more detail. And we're going to go in alphabetical order, so start with Sue Cunningham. As you know, Sue is president and CEO of CASE, the Council for Advancement and Support of Education. What you may not know is CASE supports over 3,700 schools, colleges, and universities around the world. And they have members in 80 different countries. Prior to joining CASE 3 years ago, Sue was Vice Principal for Advancement at the University of Melbourne in Australia, and before that, Director of Development for the University of Oxford in the UK. Sue, any additional comments you want to make?
Just to say I'm really excited to be here with you today, and thank you for inviting me. I look forward to the discussion.
Great, thank you. And next, let me introduce with a bit more detail Molly Marsh Heine. Molly is Vice President of Development for Earthjustice. She's a passionate environmentalist and has lived most of her life on the Front Range of Colorado. Before joining Earthjustice, she served the Nature Conservancy in a number of roles, including as Senior Principal Gift Officer, working with donors at the highest levels of philanthropy in complex and sophisticated donor engagements. In previous roles with the Conservancy, Molly served as Director of Development for the continent of Africa and Director of Operations for the Colorado chapter. When she was still in college, she also had the opportunity to live and study in Tanzania, which not too many of us can say we have done. Molly, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for that thorough introduction. I appreciate it.
Great. And finally, Kay Ridolfi, we're delighted to have you with us too. As you know, Kay is the Senior Vice President of Advancement at Cleveland Foundation. She has led the foundation's fundraising activities and 18-member advancement staff since 2011. Prior to that, Kay spent 2 decades in the field, primarily in higher education. At Case Western Reserve University, she served as Associate Vice President of Institutional Development and Director of the $1 billion capital campaign. Other positions include ADP for Major Gifts at Ohio State University, Director of Alumni Development at Ohio Wesleyan University, and Vice President of the American Lung Association of Ohio. And one other thing that's in Kay's bio that we just have to ask her about is 2 years ago, she completed the FBI Citizens Academy. And I'm not sure what that is, but Kay, that may not be what you're talking about today, but I thought it was interesting to share. Welcome, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
So we have about 40 minutes with the panel, a number of questions that we're going to start with, but we will have time for questions from our online audience. So please feel free to type those in. Let us know if you're interested in asking a question when we get to that. So the first question, and I'll ask each of you to respond. So we've heard the headlines, We know that giving for the first time topped 400 billion, and with an annual increase of 5.2%. We know much of the increase in giving is driven by the strong economy and the strong stock market. As we turn to ask each of you, I'd like to hear some of your top-line takeaways from the data and trends that you're seeing. So let's start with Molly. Molly, Giving USA reports that giving to the environmental sector increased by over 7%. What are you seeing at Earthjustice and throughout the sector?
Well, I would certainly say we've seen an increase. Our own revenues across all of our revenue streams increased much more significantly than that. For folks who aren't familiar with who Earthjustice is, we use the judicial system to defend and advance environmental protections and healthy communities for all people. So an easy way that most Americans can relate to is that we're like the ACLU for the environment.
Molly, what you're saying is great. Could you try to speak up just a little bit? I don't want people to miss it.
Yeah. So I just gave an overview of who Earthjustice is. We're a legal organization, and I use the analogy of the ACLU for the environment. You're welcome to check us out online. And we were already in a growth curve as an organization, and I think that 7% bump we surely would have felt regardless of the political climate. But as Peter had referred to earlier in his remarks, we are certainly representative of an organization that post-election received quite a bit of response. I think I saw in the slides referred to as political or reactive giving or rage giving. I would add on to that fear-based giving to a large extent. We saw just an outpouring really in the days leading up to the election and after the election of individuals who were just truly worried about the environmental laws in the country and places that they hold dear, programs that they hold dear, their neighborhoods, their health, their clean air. So just as some interesting little statistics or changes in revenue, our baseline budget, we raise our funds every year in totality was about $49 million for our fiscal year 17, and we closed at $105 million. So that was essentially doubling in cash giving. We saw about a 40% increase in our membership. We saw increases in all areas, including even in our plan giving. And that's, as a fundraiser, it's been pretty phenomenal. I've certainly raised money during recessions a few times, and so to be on the opposite end of that is going to definitely be a career highlight. Our focus right now is really on making sure we retain those donors. We have this, we feel like, sweet spot window of a market as well as a call to action by our base. So we really want to apply all the best practices of fundraising so that they will be with us regardless of who's in the White House. So I'll just end on that unless there are other questions.
Thank you, Molly. And now let's turn to Sue. Can you give us an update on higher education and giving to your sector?
Sure. Thank you very much for that. And I think as a starting point, when one looks at the wealth of data and hearing Peter's introduction, I think one of the things that goes through my mind is the data is critical, but what sits behind or in front of the data is critically important also. So not losing sight as we work with, as you kindly indicated, our many member institutions around the world and here in the US. There is a huge amount of really thoughtful relationship building going on. And of course, all of these numbers relate to the fact that there are many, many individuals, whether they be giving as alumni, whether they be giving as foundations, whether they be giving in the context of corporations, who are doing this because they believe in the importance of investing in the work of all sorts of different institutions, and obviously in cases world with educational institutions. So that's one of the thoughts that I think is really important, doesn't get lost as we're talking about the data, that this is all about what happens out of relationships and people who want to have profound impact. And in the way that Molly was describing, in a context and an environment which in many areas, and education included, is seeing real transition and in some contexts challenges. Another key takeaway is obviously looking from the very outset, looking at where education is sitting in terms of the findings for this year, and seeing that what we're looking at is a 6.2% increase in giving to education, which again, kudos to all who've contributed to that happening, and that looking at a figure of 58.9 billion, and that being the highest figure that's been achieved, inflation adjusted, in these figures for education, which is also truly exciting. Something else that Peter was doing and that can be read more deeply into the report is obviously this survey is one of a number of surveys that take place, and looking comparatively at, for example, the Volunteer Support for Education, the VSE survey, again, there are similar findings there, and in that context, looking specifically at the college and university sector in 2017, the figure raised was 43.6 billion. And there again, it was the total highest level reported since the survey's inception. Mega gifts, as Peter indicated, have a significant, play a significant part. And at the same time, one shouldn't lose sight, and this is another key finding in this, of the much broader and an enormous number of people who are supporting education. And if we look at, and the Blackboard Charitable Giving Report gives us data on this as well, if we look at the growth in online giving, on the whole era of e-giving, which if we wound back the clock 15 years was barely thought about, is really entering into the marketplace. And I know that the majority, if not all of our member institutions are working in this space and building and thinking about more dynamic ways of using online giving, which is clearly, and from a generational perspective, also something that we all have to take very seriously and be creative and imaginative about.
Great. Thank you very much, Sue. And next, Kay, we want to turn to you perspective from foundation. Of course, as what you heard from the data, giving to foundations increased at 3 times the overall increase of the rate of giving. And giving from foundations was up 6%. Kay, what are you seeing at the Cleveland Foundation in particular, and maybe even a broader picture of community foundation giving?
Thanks. Well, and just first of all, the Cleveland Foundation is the world's first community foundation. We were founded in 1914. Our founder helped found the movement, which now includes over 1,800 community foundations worldwide. And we are a mix of permanent named funds dating back to the 19-teens and current donor-advised funds. We have organizational funds, supporting organizations. For the purpose of this conversation, I'll talk mostly about the donor-advised funds, but I will tell you that we have over $2.45 billion in assets, and in 2017 we gave away over $100 million. And 2017 on the advancement side was a record-breaking year. We brought in over $112 million in cash gifts and $50 million in new bequest intentions and other planned gifts, and that is more than double the previous year, double previous years in general in donor-advised funds. Our donor-advised funds that came in the last quarter and the last month of the year equaled the number of dollars in donor-advised funds that came in the previous 3 years combined. So it was a banner year already going into fourth quarter, and then we really went over the top. And I think it was a trifecta of the stock market being up. Our donors tend to give out of their net worth as opposed to their expendable income. So when the stock market is up, they feel like they have more to give, and vice versa. And the tax law changes at the end absolutely accelerated a number of gifts that were under discussion for 2018 being pulled back into 2017. And then just the elevated profile that the Cleveland Foundation has been striving for since our centennial in 2014. So I think it was kind of a perfect storm, a perfect good storm for the Cleveland Foundation, but it was an absolute record-breaking year.
Great, great, thank you. Thank you. So next I'd like to ask each of you to share what your sector or your organization specifically are doing to respond to changing political climate and also to changes in the tax code. So it's not so much what you experienced last year, but what you're anticipating. Kay, do you want to kick us off with that?
Sure. Well, we look at this from two different lenses. And the first is, as Peter was mentioning, the worry about the number of families who itemize basically being cut in half, and how will that affect current givers. Our donors don't tend to give at the lower level. Our minimum fund size is $10,000. Our average fund size is $400,000. Donor-advised funds, I think, are actually a solution both for the donors and the nonprofits in this new environment, and we intend to market it as such. There's a strategy that a lot of our professional advisor affiliates are recommending to their mid-tier donors called bunching. And if you haven't heard of bunching, it's pretty basic. A donor who is on the cusp of being able to itemize or not might choose to lump or bunch all of their charitable donations together in one year and then not make as many the next year. They can do that really well through a donor-advised fund and then spread the contributions to the nonprofits out in a way that flows better with their cash flow needs. So we see that as a good opportunity for the Cleveland Foundation and other foundations. What I will tell you is I am concerned about the long-term relevance of estate planning. As Peter noted, the minimum threshold for an individual is now 11 million and for a couple 22 million. We and many other organizations rely on professional advisors, estate planning attorneys and accountants and wealth managers to introduce the concept of estate planning with their high net worth clients. And we don't know at this point if they will continue to do so. We are in the process of surveying our network to really see what their thoughts are going forward. But I think that's something that the entire nonprofit sector is going to have to think about. And as Peter noted, we won't really know what the effects of the tax law are on that particular issue.
Thank you very much. Sue, do you want to add any more comments on this topic?
Sure, and I think what Kay has said has been absolutely spot on. The legislation that went through just before the end of the calendar year 2017, I think in many respects is concerning the whole sector. The irony, of course, is that that 2017 was the centenary of the charitable deduction, and I know that Case and many other organizations besides were advocating for not the diminution of the charitable deduction, but actually thinking about how it could be enhanced. And one of the things we were advocating for was the creation of the universal charitable deduction, which would take all charitable giving above the line. And whilst, as we know, as Kay was eloquently conveying, what was determined in the law that passed, there are a number of activities now going on which are about doing just that, which are about supporting the universal charitable deduction. And if I could, I would just flag, because for those who are listening and who are of similar mind, that this is a real area of concern, please do support. There are two activities currently going on. One is supporting the Universal Charitable Giving Act, which is legislation being introduced by Republican Mark Walker in the House and Senator James Langford in the Senate. Now, that piece of legislation would allow non-itemizing taxpayers to deduct their charitable gifts up to a limit of 1/3, so that is capped. But it is better than where we are. The other piece of legislation that we're supporting, or the recommendation, is the Charitable Giving Tax Deduction Act, which has been introduced by Representatives Chris Smith and Henry Queller in the House, which would allow non-itemizing taxpayers to deduct charitable gifts without any limitations. So that would take us where we were advocating powerfully for, which is the proposition that we should be celebrating this profound tradition of charitable giving in this country. And of course, whilst we talk about the mega gifts, there are many, many thousands of people, nay, millions of people, who are giving not at a mega gift level, but at a modest gift level. And those gifts make a huge impact. And therefore, to celebrate that through really seeing what we can do about a universal deduction and not giving up hope that that's possible, and every participant who seeks to make that so is really important. The other thing, of course, that concerns educational institutions was the excise tax that was put on endowments. This is for institutions, private colleges and universities, those with more than 500 students with an endowment per student ratio of 500,000 or more. And I think this piece of legislation implicitly does not understand what endowments are about in higher education and the huge impact and value they bring in terms of supporting access for students and supporting research, which is life transforming and so on. And again, there is a bipartisan bill that is being put forward, which again would repeal the endowment excise tax. So please, for those who are listening and who are keen to redress some of what occurred last December, I encourage you to support the politicians who are advancing these propositions.
Thank you, Sue, for that update. And I understand the Universal Charitable Deduction Act is one that was introduced with bipartisan support. So we'll see what happens, but it's great to get that
exactly
overview.
Right.
And Molly, let me turn to you. Do you have additional information on this interesting political climate that you'd like to share with us?
No, except that at least on our end, it is a silver lining to what is a hard environment in the world of environmental advocacy and protection overall. I so appreciate actually, Sue, getting the information about those legislative opportunities, and we'll be sure to follow up on that, and also with our supporters. We saw a bump in donor-advised funds as well, and I've been tracking it, and to some of the earlier comments, it seems a little premature to formulate a strategy yet, although one thing we have considered looking at, I don't know if it's something we'd act on, but we do not administer donor-advised funds ourselves, although we know that some larger organizations, certainly community foundations, will hold DAFs. And one of our challenges has been understanding who these new donor-advised fund givers are. Sometimes they can be very, very anonymous. Sometimes they identify themselves. So when you have an influx with such volume like we saw, we'd really like to know who they are. And we've thought about that. If that is a real growing trend, perhaps we might look at administering a donor-advised fund program ourselves, in addition, of course, to all the many other options that are out there, but it may be an opportunity to get to know our donors more closely who are using that wealth tool.
Great, thank you. I think we have time to take one or two questions from our online audience, and then we'll come back to more questions for the panel.
Yes, thank you, Aggie. We do have a number of questions. They are coming in fast and furiously. We have one from Tara. Is there any data about giving to DAF sponsored by community foundations versus commercial providers? And perhaps that's a good question for Kay.
So, hello. It's up across the board. If you'll note, Fidelity is now the largest, quote, charity, 501c3 in the country. So I think it's up across the Community Foundation Board and clearly in the private board. I would just note that the difference between working through a community foundation is the one-on-one relationship that you build. Every one of our donors is assigned a donor relations officer who asks them at the front end, what would you like to do with your philanthropy and how can we be helpful to you? Some of our donors really want the expertise on the program side of the house due to 100 years of really knowing Cleveland's most dire needs and having all the inside scoop on the nonprofits as well. We're a real wealth of knowledge. Others really want help with family philanthropy, which I can talk about later if that's of interest, but that is an area where we are gaining expertise. And still others just want to be part of the Cleveland Foundation family. We host a number of events and VIP special sneak peeks at new things coming on board. So I think that is something that all of the community foundations are trying to do, is really work with our donors and make sure they're well aware of the needs of the community.
Excellent. Thank you. Kay, anything that you'd like to add, Peter or Aggie?
What I can add, and this is not across the board information yet, Fidelity Charitable of the various national funds is the largest, as we know. They're the second largest grant maker, and last year it was only the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation that distributed more in grants. But what Fidelity reported for contributions in calendar year 2017 was an increase of 67%. Many of the other national funds are on a fiscal year, so we don't have their year-end data yet. So I just want to point out that the growth has been very brisk at the community foundation level, but we're seeing similar trends, but still early returns from the national funds.
Giving USA estimates that 20% of public society benefit giving is donor-advised fund giving, which would put it at about $6 billion last year. We're not able to pull out a number from this data for the giving to donor-advised funds in community foundations, but there's other data that I shared that showed the ramp up in the amount being given to those to donor-advised funds and community foundations, and the amount also being shared by those holders. So it's a very significant movement. You know, talking about public society benefit, there was a question asking what exactly is public society benefit. So let me just read this description in the data. Organizations within the public society benefit subsector include those related to voter education, civil rights, civil liberties, consumer rights, and community and economic development. Public society benefit organizations also include freestanding research institutions that focus on biological, physical, and social sciences, as well as public policy research. Those that promote philanthropy and those that raise funds to distribute to other nonprofits, such as the United Way's, combined federal campaigns, and Jewish federations, as well as the for-profit donor-advised fund holding organizations. So there's a lot in that category.
Excellent. Do you want me to ask another question from
why don't you go with
audience?
one more, Sarah?
Okay. And I think this question might be more suitable for Sue, although please feel free to chime in. But this question is from Lisa Cohen. And what are some examples of effective, meaningful ways to engage alumni, foundation, and corporate donors?
Well, I think that's at the heart of what's resulted in all of these outcomes. And I think I would say there are many things that achieve this outcome and that we see our member organizations doing. And obviously we see educational institutions with really small teams as well as really large teams of people. I think at the heart of it is having an organizational vision where you can be clear and explicit about how philanthropy and philanthropic support can benefit the institution. I think it's about building relationships that in which there is real integrity, that people are really smart and really clear at understanding if a relationship is all about how much someone might give as opposed to their genuine engagement with the organization, I think they're far less successful. So I think having a genuine desire to engage, particularly when you're thinking about more significant gifts with individuals and foundations and corporations, and understand that these things take time to realize something that is profound and impactful. And I think, as I said earlier, really being innovative around thinking about engaging, particularly when we're looking at younger alumni and the younger stakeholders, thinking about how we're using online opportunities, because there is growing evidence that the millennial generation far prefers to be engaged with in that way than more traditional means.
Let me continue with a question for the panel, and then we will go back to more questions from the online audience. And what I'd like to do is, you mentioned, Kay, that you could talk some about family philanthropy, and I know that your foundation has also looked into the intergenerational transfer that has been talked about, and whether or not that wealth transfer has already started or is still coming. or will it be a reality? It's something that you've given a lot of thought to. Do you have some additional comments that you'd like to make?
Sure. So we have always been involved with family philanthropy. We had the world's first supporting organization that was started over 40 years ago, and that was a family fund, much like a private foundation. And we continue to have, at any given time, about 10 to 12 of these. And that absolutely involves the family in a very formal, structured way. From a donor-advised fund perspective, that is one of the things that we are really increasing our service level in. We are getting all of our donor relations officers trained in 2164 training, and that is kind of an odd name, but it stands for you start thinking about your philanthropy and your real legacy at 64, and your children on the other end may be as young as 21. We are often asked to help our donor-advised fund donors work with their children, the successor advisors, on the outset, just creating a mission, vision, values for the family fund. We have some donors who ask their donor relations officer to lead a family meeting on an annual basis where every member helps make a group decision and individual decisions about grants. We recently had a national expert come in and talk to our donors and their children about family philanthropy and really work through an exercise with them. And we are in the process of really refining a center for family philanthropy. It is a growing area. We are seeing more and more interest of our donors wanting to involve their adult children in their overall plan. We also have always worked with a network of professional advisors, and we often are called in to work with a professional advisor. Either the advisor calls us in to work with the client, or our donor asks us to work with their advisor on their long-term financial and philanthropic planning. So it's something that we're very proud of. It's something that my colleagues across the sector are doing quite a bit of as well, and I'd be happy to talk with anyone offline about that in more detail.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for that, Kay. And then I want to ask one other question of our panel and invite all of you to participate. That is, there's been some information in the news in the last few weeks expressing concern that giving may be down this year, and also a concern about the participation rates in giving. Molly, earlier you mentioned that Earthjustice had seen a number of reactive gifts come in and a big increase in giving to Earthjustice. And I'd be interested to see what you're seeing now and if those donors that made first-time gifts are coming back or not.
Well, so far our trends are still continuing, and those donors that joined us have given again across all levels, and in fact, especially in our middle donor and our baseline membership have increased their giving. So we see that as positive, obviously, but also a continued concern and a focus of their philanthropy in a sector that they are incredibly worried about over the course of the current administration and then potentially beyond that. And as I mentioned before, I think we are still focusing on all the different revenue streams that how we can make sure that we are keeping that retention going and focusing, no matter whether it's your $25 gift and what that strategy is, to some of our larger 7-figure and 8-figure giving. I think the piece of, I loved Kay's comments about 2164. It's the first time I've heard that, but that's really cool. I think that actually makes a tremendous amount of sense. And we're in the prospect right now, really more upping our game in planned giving, because I really think that is the long game that you have to be looking at. And it's so easy in the short term because we're feeling it, at least in our sector, where it's so emotional right now that you kind of have to put that head aside and also think about the larger universe of giving over the life of your institution.
Great, thank you. And Sue, I don't know if you'll have data at your fingertips, but can you comment any on alumni participation rates in giving and information that might be coming out of the education sector regarding the number of donors and donor retention?
Sure, and obviously donor retention is really important, and clearly a vital part of that is having really thoughtful and appropriate stewardship programs so that you're engaging with donors. The VSC 2017 estimated report for 2017 saw that alumni giving was 26.1% of the support coming into educational institutions. So alumni as a key stakeholder group continue to be critically important for the educational sector. They historically have really been used, certainly in different studies, alumni participation as the one and only benchmark to measure alumni engagement. And obviously, as we all know, it's something of a blunt tool insofar as the better the data you have on your alumni, the more effective your systems and processes are for capturing data. Actually, that reduces your alumni participation percentage because you have more contact with alumni. So CASE has been working for just over a year now. We have a working group who are focusing on developing a set of standardized alumni engagement metrics. So there will, in due course, be a far broader set of mechanisms for benchmarking and being able to track alumni engagement, which we hope in the way that has been true of CASE fundraising standards for a long time, that these alumni engagement metrics become similar standards to be able to respond more fully to the question that you just asked, Aggie.
Thank you. Thank you. So we have time to go to some more questions from the online participants. Sarah, do you have any more?
Yes, we do. And if we are not able to get to your question, we'll make sure to get to your question following today's session. But Peter, this one is more for you regarding, earlier you mentioned that organizations have done a good job of investing in technology. Not as many are using it to maximize their investment. Is there anything more that you want to talk about in reference to that, or any more specific?
Sure, and thanks for asking the question, because I could have given some examples. They're really simple examples. It's not unusual, for instance, for us to be engaged by a nonprofit organization that has invested significantly in a database that has capacity and abilities that they're not using. So let me give you a specific example of that. I noted that in annual giving, the most important thing an organization wants to do is take advantage of the reasons that somebody makes a first gift to the organization and retain and work to upgrade that donor. Well, most databases have the capacity to make it known to the organization, to our knowledge, this is the first gift that this donor has ever made. Therefore, if it's Ridolfi making the first gift she's ever made to her alma mater, Ohio State, I think it is, would say, "Dear Kay, thank you for your gift. To our understanding, this is the first gift you've ever made to Ohio State. Here's what it's allowed us to do." In a subsequent letter, it might say, "Kay, we'd like you to consider doubling your gift." What this requires is being able to use a database system to identify specific information and then target donors in a way that feels personal, and allowing them to, see the impact of their gift and asking them directly, would they be willing to increase or even double their gift? We should be able to learn about donors' interests over time and use that in how we relate to donors. It could be a specific part of the mission that the donor cares about. It could be a specific way that a donor chooses to give. So if we know that some donors choose to give online, we should make sure that we reach out to them if we can with a way for them to easily repeat their gift over the prior year. There are, regarding participation and volunteer involvement, there are some new products out in the field across a variety of vendors. Just do your homework, that help nonprofit organizations engage volunteers to approach their peers about organizations that they care about. We think this is especially important with millennials. Millennials are influencing each other regarding the causes and the organizations that they're supporting. And there are vendors out there who can help you work with millennials or other volunteers who might be on Facebook or LinkedIn or some other aspect of social media. And these are tools that are available to nonprofits. Many of them have invested in these tools, but they've not yet invested the time to develop the expertise to execute effectively to target donors in ways that would result in stronger philanthropy.
Excellent. Anything else that we'd like to add? Great. Should I continue?
Go ahead.
Hey, excellent. We had a question from Christopher Lee. Can you discuss MegaGift's performance last year and how it compares to past years? And relatedly, are MegaGifts more or less likely going forward as donors are obviously seeing DAPS as their top charitable?
Well, I will just jump in and say that I think going forward, the tax law structure as it is currently structured is designed in a way that I think we'll be seeing more dollars coming from fewer donors. So yes to the mega gifts. You know, again, worry about the $1,000 and under gifts.
And if I could add, I mean, one of the activities that attracts mega gifts in the educational sector is obviously philanthropic campaigns. We are seeing significant numbers of campaigns. The case five largest campaigns in the U.S. These 54 campaigns currently that have goals of $1 billion or more. So we're certainly seeing in the last few years a significant growth in mega gifts. Interestingly, in 2000 and in this year so far in 2018, we've only seen I think 3 really mega gifts of 100 million or more to educational institutions, and of course we're now in June. So I hope that the second part of the year sees a great increase in those, because we've had many more of those year on year and years past, but they're clearly a really critical part of the philanthropic support for education. And again, I wouldn't want to lose sight of all of the gifts and all of the donors who make a significant contribution, even though they're not at that scale.
We don't have the comparative data at our fingertips for mega gifts last year compared to this year. That's a good question. Let us get back to you directly with that information. I did note in my presentation that there are 132 Americans who have signed the Giving Pledge, and our estimate of their household net worth is $680 billion. And a lot of these people have not yet done the lion's share of the philanthropy that they intend to do. So that is another strong data point that suggests that mega giving will continue to pick up momentum in the future.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Peter. And actually, the data for 2016 was our numbers suggest there were 14 gifts of that scale, and 2017, 19 gifts. So that we're at 3 in 2018. As I said, hopefully the rest of the year we'll see many more evolving.
Thank you.
And obviously, these are the results of years and years of work.
So Sarah, maybe one more question from our audience?
Absolutely. One of the questions says, regarding the $20.77 billion in corporate giving, what does this include? I understand that sponsorships and cause-related marketing is not. What about employee giving? Where is that included, individual or corporate giving?
Employee giving is generally included under giving by individuals. However, the match from a corporation would be included under giving by corporations.
Okay, excellent. Let's just do one more for the road, I guess. So it seems that nonprofits should be trying to build relationships with donor relationship managers so that they can potentially get their nonprofit in front of donors with DAPS. But are relationship managers open to that? And what is the best way for a nonprofit to be responsive to this data point? And this is asked by Johnny Merrifield.
Well, I would tell you that we do not publish our list of donors because we don't want our donors to be targeted by the other nonprofits. We tend to keep it separate from the program side of the house. But once a donor has made a gift to your organization, they become your donor as well, and I would say steward them. That's what they want. A small percentage of our donors choose to remain anonymous. Most do not, and they would welcome any relationship that they have with the nonprofit.
I would agree with that. I think the sometimes when it comes through Fidelity or Schwab, Vanguard, like we're limited unless they identify themselves. But we still, as a matter of practice, will even reach out to those financial institutions to make sure that we've asked about any reporting requirements that go along with the gift. We still send correspondence to pass on to the donor. And certainly if it comes through a community foundation, we make sure that we're introducing ourselves and forming relationships with the community foundation as well. We really see them exactly as we would the donor.
And I would add that we consult with our program officers quite a bit on behalf of donors if a donor is looking for guidance. And so, again, maintaining good relationships with the program officers and the community foundations is a good way to stay in front of the foundation in your local community.
Great advice, other way around. So we only have a few minutes left. Before we go, I'd like to have each of our panelists take just a few seconds and share any recommendations and tips they may have for how to achieve positive fundraising results. Okay, let's have you go first, and then Sue, and then finish up with Molly.
Well, I would just like to echo what Peter said in his best practices. It's, get to know your donors, steward your donors, make sure that your donors see the ROI of their gift. I feel like donors are wanting to see outcomes more and more, and make sure that you're putting causes and issues from your organization out there that are relevant to what's going on in today's world. But most of all, just thank your donors, engage your donors, make sure they know that they're a vital part of your organization.
I would echo that firmly. I think I'd add to that, working at thinking about how your organization is perceived from the outside in. Really think about the donor experience, envisaging or imagining yourself in their shoes, and what the experience is like in terms of interacting with your team or your organization, and thinking how one can build that to be as effective as it is. Because, of course, whilst we're here to talk about a really valuable set of data that informs our decisions, this is ultimately all about people, and it's all about relationships. And taking the time and the thought to get those right will lead to success.
I definitely agree with everything my colleagues said, and then some. I guess a takeaway for me from our somewhat unique experience in this time was the importance of investing in infrastructure for your department, and taking a look at not only what are you doing to raise the money for today, but what is your organization going to be in 5 to 10 years, and where you want that to be, and what you need to support that. We were fortunate to have had some new investment in the development department, but it wasn't enough, and it put a lot of stress on my entire department. And we're still playing catch up on that. So it was really a good lesson for me that you always have a good argument when you're the revenue generator, of course, with respect to program balances, but you need to be staffed appropriately to carry out the work at the quality and level you want to carry it out at.
Thank you all for your very wise advice. Peter, over to you.
Thanks, Aggie. I just want to take a moment on behalf of my colleagues to thank our panelists for participating in this conversation. Feedback we get every year is that they look forward to the insights that our panelists have, and helping bring the data to life and helping them figure out what can they do with this data to positively impact the mission of their organizations. I also want to thank Aggie for joining me on this webinar, and thank you all who participated with us today. I hope you're as excited about this data as we are, and we encourage you to keep working hard to advance the mission of your organization. Thank you so much.